Hey guys, tonight we're stepping onto the dusty, sun-warmed stones of a Roman road, stretching like a ribbon across a world that smells of olive groves and ambition. Picture yourself trudging along, sandals slapping against concrete so solid it's practically smirking at time itself. The air hums with the clatter of carts and the shouts of legionaries, while distant hills shimmer under a Mediterranean sun. You're in the Roman Empire at its peak, and these roads, they're the veins pumping its power. Fair warning, if you trip on a milestone or anger a passing centurion, you probably won't survive this, but let's roll the dice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on a via, one of Rome's legendary roads, and you can't help but wonder, why concrete? Why did the Romans, with their togas and questionable plumbing, obsess over building roads from this gritty, gray miracle mix? It's not like they had dump trucks or YouTube tutorials. Yet, by 300 BCE, they were laying down highways that would outlast empires, some still smooth enough to drive a Vespa on today. The mainstream fact is simple. Concrete made roads durable, letting Rome connect its sprawling empire from Britain to Babylon. Unlike dirt paths that turned to mud or gravel that scattered like scared pigeons, concrete held firm under chariot wheels and hobnailed boots. It was cheap, moldable, and, let's be honest, kind of sexy in its practicality. But here's the quirky tidbit. Romans didn't just stumble onto concrete like it was a happy accident at the pottery kiln. They mixed it with volcanic ash, specifically pozzolana from the Bay of Naples, which gave it a weird, almost magical strength. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of adding protein powder to your smoothie, except this smoothie could hold up a legion. Historians still argue whether the Romans fully understood the chemistry or just got lucky with trial and error. Did they know pozzolana silica bonded with lime to make a waterproof, crack-resistant supermaterial? Or were they just tossing stuff together like a chaotic Iron Chef episode? Whatever the case, you're walking on the result, and it's a game changer. You pause, running your hand over a slab of concrete, its surface worn but unyielding. The Romans didn't build these roads for joyrides. They had bigger plans. By the time Julius Caesar was strutting around, Rome's empire was a patchwork of conquests, and without roads, it'd be like trying to run a group chat with no Wi-Fi. You needed to move armies supplies, and tax collectors faster than a grumpy mule could complain. Concrete roads slashed travel times, letting legions march 20 miles a day, and merchants haul wine amphorae without smashing them. You can almost hear the empire's pulse in the rhythmic thud of feet on pavement. But let's not romanticize it too much. Building these roads wasn't a chill weekend project. You're picturing slaves and soldiers sweating under a brutal sun, hauling rocks while some overseer barks orders. The concrete was a stroke of genius, sure, but it was also a tool of control, letting Rome tighten its grip on far-flung provinces. You glance down the road, where milestones mark distances to the capital, each one a quiet flex of Roman dominance. And yeah, in case you're wondering, those milestones were basically ancient billboards. Some even had propaganda carved into them, like Emperor Augustus says, "You're welcome." Subtle, right? As you walk, the road stretches toward the horizon, a testament to why Rome bet on concrete. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was about making an empire feel like one big, connected neighborhood. You're starting to get why these roads were the backbone of Rome's glory. But the real magic, that's in the recipe itself, and it's coming up next. You're still strolling along this Roman road, the concrete beneath your sandals, feeling like it's daring time to take a swing. The air carries a faint whiff of dust and distant sea salt, and you're starting to wonder, what's in this stuff? How did the Romans whip up a material so tough it makes modern sidewalks look like they're throwing a tantrum? Let's dive in to the secret sauce of Roman concrete, the recipe that turned their roads into empire-binding superhighways. It's not just rocks and water. Oh no, this is ancient alchemy with a side of volcanic grit. The mainstream fact is that Roman concrete, or opus caementicium, was a game changer because of its unique ingredients: lime, water, aggregate, like rocks or broken bricks, and that star player, pozzolana. This volcanic ash, scooped from the slopes near Vesuvius, gave concrete its superhero strength. You're picturing a Roman engineer, toga slightly askew, stirring a cauldron of this mix like it's a witch's brew. Pozzolana's silica and alumina reacted with lime to form a chemical bond that made the concrete harden underwater and resist cracks like a champ. That's why their roads didn't just survive chariot traffic, but also centuries of rain, frost, and neglect. By 200 BCE, Romans were slathering this stuff everywhere: roads, aqueducts, even the Colosseum's foundation. It was the Swiss Army knife of building materials. Now, for the quirky tidbit, some Roman concrete recipes included brace yourself. Animal blood. Yep, you heard that right. Builders occasionally tossed in blood, likely from slaughtered livestock, because they thought it made the mix more frost-resistant. Imagine the scene: a construction site smelling like a butcher shop, with workers shrugging like, "Hey, the blood worked last time." Historians still argue whether this was widespread or just a weird regional quirk. Did the blood's proteins actually help? Or was it ancient superstition, like knocking on wood, but messier? No one's pouring bloody concrete today, so maybe the Romans were just flexing their experimental side. You crouch down, eyeing the road's surface, picturing how they made it. First, they dig a trench, sometimes 3 feet deep, to ensure stability. Then, they'd layer it like a lasagna. Big stones at the bottom, smaller gravel, and finally, that glorious concrete mix, smoothed out to a slight camber, so rainwater slid off like it owed rent. You can almost see the workers sweating under a merciless sun, tamping down the mix while cursing in Latin. The process was precise, almost obsessive, but it paid off. These roads could handle the weight of oxen carts, armored soldiers, and the occasional emperor's ego-driven parade. But let's pause for a modern aside. If you've ever driven on a pothole-riddled street, you're probably jealous of this Roman road right now. Their concrete was so durable that some sections, like parts of the Appian Way, are still in use. Meanwhile, your local highway crumbles after one bad winter. What gives? Historians still argue whether the Roman success came from better materials or smarter engineering. Was Pozzolana the secret MVP? Or was it their knack for layering and compacting? Some say modern concrete prioritizes speed over longevity, while others think we've just lost the Romans' obsessive attention to detail. Either way, you're walking on a road that's basically giving a 2,000-year middle finger to entropy. You run your fingers over the concrete, feeling its grainy defiance. This mix wasn't just about building roads. It was about building an empire. Every slab you step on is a reminder of how Rome turned a volcanic quirk into a world-shaping tool. And speaking of shaping, you're about to see how these roads were laid down, mile after back-breaking mile, to stitch together a sprawling empire. The construction crews are waiting just over the next hill. You're trudging further along this Roman road, the concrete underfoot as unyielding as a centurion's stare. The landscape around you shifts. Olive groves give way to rugged hills, and the air grows heavy with the scent of sweat and stone. You're about to witness the sheer grind of building these roads, the monumental effort that turned Rome's concrete obsession into a network spanning thousands of miles. Picture yourself at a construction site where the clink of tools and the shouts of workers drown out the cicadas. This is where the empire's arteries were forged, one back-breaking layer at a time. The mainstream fact is that Roman road construction was a masterclass in engineering precision, designed to connect an empire stretching from Hadrian's Wall to the Euphrates. By the 2nd century CE, Rome's network spanned over 250,000 miles, with 50,000 miles paved in stone or concrete. You're watching a crew in action now, and it's no small feat. They start by surveying the land with tools like the groma, a cross-shaped device that ensures dead straight paths, because Romans didn't do curves unless a mountain forced their hand. They dig a deep trench, lay a foundation of massive stones, then pack in layers of gravel, and that magical pozzolana concrete you're getting fond of. The top is crowned with flat paving stones or more concrete, sloped just enough to shrug off rain. It's like building a cake, if the cake had to carry an army and last 2 millennia. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some roads were built with literal crocodile dung. Okay, not in the concrete itself, but as a fertilizer for the embankments, stabilizing the road's edges. Romans hauled exotic manure from Egypt, believing it strengthened the soil. You're side-eyeing the grassy verge now, wondering if it's hiding ancient croc poo. Historians still argue whether this was practical or just Rome flexing its "we can import anything" vibe. Did crocodile dung actually help? Or was it a status symbol, like slapping a designer label on a dirt pile? Either way, it's a reminder that Roman engineering had its weird side. You step closer to the workers, feeling the rhythm of their labor. Soldiers, slaves, and local conscripts toil together, their hands calloused from hauling rocks. The army often led these projects, since roads were as much for conquest as commerce. You can almost hear the overseer barking orders, while a surveyor squints through his groma like it's a Roman GPS. They're not just building a road, they're building Rome's grip on the world. Every mile laid is a mile Rome can march, tax, or govern. But it's brutal work. You wince as a slave stumbles under a stone's weight, and you're reminded that this empire's glory came at a cost. Let's toss in a modern aside. Ever sat in traffic because of road work that's only taken 6 months? These Roman crews could have laid a highway from Rome to Naples in that time. No coffee breaks needed. Their efficiency makes you wonder why we're still dodging orange cones. Historians still argue whether Rome's speed came from military discipline or sheer manpower. Some say the army's organization was the key. Others point to the endless supply of forced labor. Whatever the trick, you're walking on a road that was built faster than your city's last overpass. You pause, kicking a pebble that's probably older than most countries. The road stretches on, a testament to Roman grit and concrete genius. Remember that pozzolana mix from earlier? It's holding this whole operation together, letting these roads snake through swamps, deserts, and mountains. But these paths didn't just move people, they moved power. You're about to see how these concrete ribbons gave Rome an iron grip on its empire. And trust me, it's more intense than a chariot race. You're still pacing along this Roman road, the concrete under your sandals, humming with the weight of centuries. The sun beats down, glinting off milestones, carved with emperors' names, and the air buzzes with the distant clatter of hooves. You're starting to grasp how these roads weren't just paths, they were the empire's nervous system, wiring together a sprawling beast of a civilization. Let's dive into how these concrete arteries pumped power, control, and a whole lot of Roman swagger across the known world. You're about to see why every step you take is a step on Rome's iron grip. The mainstream fact is that Roman roads were the backbone of imperial dominance, enabling rapid military deployment and economic control. By the 1st century CE, roads like the Via Appia and Via Flaminia let legions march from Rome to distant provinces in weeks, not months. You're picturing a cohort of soldiers, shields clanking, moving at a relentless 20 miles a day. These roads meant Rome could crush rebellions before they spread, like hitting snooze on a Gallic uprising. Economically, they were just as clutch. Tax collectors zipped along, squeezing coin from provinces, while grain and wine flowed back to Rome's markets. The roads turned a patchwork empire into a single, throbbing machine, with concrete as its lifeblood. Now, for the quirky tidbit, some milestones doubled as propaganda stunts. You're passing one now, etched with "Built by Emperor Trajan, your benevolent overlord." Okay, slight paraphrase. These stones weren't just GPS markers. They were Rome's version of a viral ad campaign, reminding everyone who was boss. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions boosted loyalty or just annoyed locals. Did a farmer in Hispania feel warm fuzzies reading "All Hail Nero" on his daily commute? Or did he roll his eyes and mutter something unprintable? Either way, you're walking on a road that's as much about flexing power as moving troops. You pause, watching a chariot rattle past, its driver cursing a wheel wobble. These roads weren't built for joyrides. They were strategic. Rome's enemies couldn't hide when legions could speed march to their doorstep. You're imagining a general in his tent, poring over maps, knowing his supply lines are rock solid thanks to that pozzolana concrete you're still geeking out over. But it wasn't just about war. Merchants used these roads to haul amphorae of olive oil, making Rome's elites fatter and happier. And those tax collectors, They were the empire's vampires, draining provinces dry, all because concrete let them move fast. You're starting to see how every slab underfoot was a power play. Let's throw in a modern aside. Ever gripe about slow bureaucracy? Imagine Rome without these roads, taxes stuck in transit, armies lost in the boonies. It'd be like running a Fortune 500 company with only carrier pigeons. Historians still argue whether roads were more about military might or economic glue. Some say they were built to rush troops to hotspots. Others argue they were for keeping the empire's wallet stuffed. You're leaning toward both because Rome wasn't exactly subtle about wanting it all. Either way, these roads made the empire feel smaller, like a group chat where everyone's online at once. You glance down the road where a milestone looms, bragging about some emperor's generosity. Remember the crocodile dung embankment from the last stretch? It's holding strong, keeping this road level. But power isn't just in the concrete, it's in who travels it. You're about to join the merchants, soldiers, and wandering poets who brought these roads to life, their stories etched into every rut and crack. The Via Appia's getting busy, so keep your sandals tied and your wits sharp. You're still wandering this Roman road, the concrete beneath your sandals, warm from a sun that's starting to dip low. The air's alive with the jangle of mule harnesses and the chatter of voices, Latin, Greek, something guttural from a distant province. You're not alone anymore. You're swept into the pulse of the Via Appia, where merchants hawk wine, soldiers march in lockstep, and travelers swap stories like they're trading coins. These roads weren't just for moving power. They were alive with people, each one a thread in Rome's sprawling tapestry. Let's join the crowd and see who's sharing this concrete highway with you. The mainstream fact is that Roman roads were bustling corridors of commerce and culture, linking cities and provinces in a way that made the empire feel like one giant marketplace. By the 1st century CE, roads like the Via Egnatia carried goods from the Adriatic to Asia Minor, while the Via Appia funneled trade from southern Italy to Rome. You're dodging a cart piled with amphorae, their clay glinting with oil stains. Merchants moved everything: grain, marble, even exotic beasts for the Colosseum, because concrete roads could take the weight and weather. Soldiers used them too, their hobnailed boots leaving faint scars you can still trace. These roads weren't just infrastructure. They were the empire's bloodstream, carrying its life. Now, for the quirky tidbit, some travelers left graffiti on milestones, like ancient Yelp reviews. You spot one scratched into a stone. Gaius was here. Wine's better in Capua. Romans loved defacing their roads with boasts, curses, or love-struck doodles. Historians still argue whether this graffiti was a cultural habit or just bored travelers with too much time. Did it reflect a literate society flexing its wit? Or was it the Roman equivalent of tagging a bus stop? Either way, you're grinning at the thought of a merchant carving his hot take 2,000 years ago, probably while his mule chewed the scenery. You weave through the crowd, the road's camber guiding your steps like it's got your back. Picture the scene. A Syrian trader barters silk for Roman glass. His accent thick, but his smile universal. Nearby, a legionary griping about his sore feet ignores a poet reciting verses for spare coins. The concrete underfoot, remember that pozzolana magic, makes this chaos possible, steady under the weight of carts and egos. You're struck by how these roads turn strangers into neighbors, letting ideas and goods flow as freely as the Tiber. But it's not all rosy. You notice a chained prisoner shuffling past, proof that Rome's roads carried suffering too. Let's toss in a modern aside. Ever been stuck at an airport watching the world shuffle by? That's this road, but with more togas and fewer overpriced lattes. The Via Appia was like an ancient LAX, minus the TSA pat-downs. Historians still argue whether these roads unified the empire or just made it easier to exploit. Did they foster cultural exchange, or were they mainly for funneling wealth to Rome? You're leaning toward both, because nothing says Roman efficiency like profiting while spreading civilization. Either way, you're swept up in a human tide, and it's electric. You pause by a roadside shrine where a traveler drops a coin for safe passage. That crocodile dung embankment from earlier? It's still holding the road steady, a quiet nod to Rome's weird ingenuity. These travelers, merchants, soldiers, poets, they're the empire's heartbeat, and the roads gave them wings. But the real marvel is how this concrete outlasted them all. You're about to dig into why these roads are still here, mocking time like they've got a personal grudge. You're still ambling along this Roman road, the concrete under your sandals as defiant as ever, its surface catching the fading light like it's got secrets to spill. The crowd of merchants and soldiers has thinned, and the air feels quieter now, scented with wild thyme and the faint tang of dust. You're starting to wonder why these roads, built when togas were peak fashion, are still here, outlasting empires, invasions, and a few questionable haircuts. Let's unpack the genius of Roman concrete and why it's still smirking at time, making modern engineers jealous enough to write angry blog posts. The mainstream fact is that Roman concrete's durability comes from its unique chemical makeup, particularly the use of pozzolana. That volcanic ash you're practically in love with by now. Unlike modern concrete, which often cracks under freeze-thaw cycles or salt water, Roman concrete gets stronger over time. The pozzolana-lime mix forms calcium, aluminum, silicate, hydrate, a mouthful of a compound that binds tighter than a Roman tax collector's ledger. By the 2nd century CE, roads like the Via Appia were built to shrug off earthquakes, floods, and centuries of neglect. You're walking on some sections today, yes, in 2025, that are still functional, hosting tourists and the occasional wayward scooter. That's not just engineering, it's a flex. Now, for the quirky tidbit, some Roman roads were so well built that medieval peasants thought they were made by giants. You're picturing a farmer in 800 CE, staring at the Via Flaminia, whispering about mythical builders with biceps the size of wine barrels. Historians still argue whether these legends sprang from awe or just a lack of construction manuals. Did locals genuinely believe in giant road makers? Or was it a campfire story to spook the kids? Either way, you're chuckling at the idea of Romans accidentally starting a fantasy franchise with their overpowered concrete. You crouch, tracing a seam in the road surface, feeling its stubborn strength. The secret's in the mix, sure, but also the method. Romans layered their roads like a paranoid baker guards a recipe. Deep foundations, compacted gravel, and that pozzolana concrete, poured and tamped with military precision. They even added a slight camber. Remember that from the construction crews? To shed water like a duck's back. It's why these roads didn't just survive. They thrived, carrying medieval pilgrims, Renaissance artists, and now you, with your slightly sore sandals. Modern concrete, by contrast, often leans on steel reinforcement, which rusts and cracks like it's auditioning for a disaster flick. You're starting to think Rome had the right idea. Keep it simple. Make it last. Let's throw in a modern aside. Ever driven on a highway that's more patch than pavement? You're probably cursing your city council while wishing for Roman concrete. Historians still argue whether we could replicate Rome's durability today. Some say pozzolana's scarcity is the issue. Others blame our obsession with cutting corners for quick builds. Imagine if your local DOT used volcanic ash instead of rushing to meet a budget deadline. Your commute might not feel like a moon landing simulation. Either way, you're marveling at a road that's basically laughing at the calendar. You stand, brushing dust off your hands, and glance down the Via Appia, that crocodile dung embankment from a few miles back. It's still doing its job, keeping the road steady. These roads didn't just last. They shaped history, carrying armies, ideas, and that cheeky graffiti you laughed at earlier. But not everyone saw them as miracles. You're about to uncover the darker side, the human cost of these concrete marvels, and it's not as pretty as the sunset glinting off these stones. You're still treading this Roman road, the concrete under your sandals, cool now as twilight settles, casting long shadows over the milestones. The air's grown still, carrying only the faint crunch of your steps and the distant bleat of a goat. You've been marveling at the genius of these roads, their pozzolana magic, their empire-binding swagger. But now it's time to flip the coin. Building these concrete marvels wasn't all togas and triumph. It was a grind that crushed bodies and spirits. You're about to question the human cost of Rome's road building, and it's not a bedtime story for the faint-hearted. Let's peel back the glory and see who paid the price. The mainstream fact is that Roman road construction relied heavily on forced labor, including slaves, prisoners of war, and conscripted locals. By the 3rd century BCE, when roads like the Via Appia were taking shape, Rome's empire was fueled by conquest, and captives were its cheapest resource. You're picturing a work crew now, sunburned men, some in chains, hauling stones under the lash of an overseer. Building a single mile could take weeks, with workers digging trenches, crushing gravel, and mixing that blood-spiked concrete you smirked about earlier. The empire's 250,000 miles of roads didn't come cheap. Human lives were the currency, spent without a second thought. It's a stark reminder that Rome's brilliance was built on suffering. Now, for the quirky tidbit, some workers left ghost marks in the concrete, handprints or tool scratches, frozen in time. You spot one now, a faint palm pressed into a slab, like a worker saying, "I was here." Historians still argue whether these were accidental or quiet acts of rebellion. Did a slave sneak a mark to claim a shred of immortality, or was it just a clumsy slip during a long shift? Either way, you're staring at a whisper from someone whose name history forgot, and it hits harder than a milestone's propaganda. You pause, running your fingers over that handprint, imagining the man behind it. He might have been a Gaul, captured in battle, or a local farmer, roped into labor to pay taxes. The work was brutal, back-breaking days under a sun that didn't care, with meager rations and no OSHA to file a complaint. Soldiers supervised, but they weren't exactly sipping wine either. They hauled rocks too, their discipline as rigid as the Groma lines from the construction days. You're seeing the road differently now, each slab a testament to sweat and sacrifice. That pozzolana concrete, so clever and durable, was mixed with more than volcanic ash. It carried the weight of human toil. Let's toss in a modern aside. Ever grumbled about a tough workday? then gone home to Netflix and a pizza? These workers would have killed for your problems. Their office was a dusty trench. Their bonus was not getting whipped. Historians still argue whether Rome's reliance on slave labor was a moral failing or just the era's grim reality. Some say it was standard for ancient empires. Others argue Rome's scale of exploitation was uniquely ruthless. You're leaning toward it's complicated, but the handprint under your fingers feels painfully simple. A human cost, no debate needed. You stand, brushing off the dust, and glance down the road. That crocodile dung embankment from earlier, it's still there, quietly supporting this path built on blood and ambition. These roads didn't just carry merchants and legions. They carried Rome's culture, its ideas, its gods. You're about to see how this concrete network spread more than goods. It spread the soul of an empire, for better or worse. Keep walking. The story's getting deeper. You're still drifting along this Roman road. The concrete under your sandals, now bathed in moonlight, its surface glowing like it's whispering old secrets. The night air is cool, laced with the scent of pine and distant campfires, and the quiet hums with the weight of history. You've seen the blood and sweat behind these roads, but now you're noticing something else. The way they carried more than just soldiers and wine. These concrete veins spread Rome's culture, its language, its gods, its very soul, across a sprawling empire. Let's explore how these roads became highways for ideas, faith, and the occasional toga trend. The mainstream fact is that Roman roads were cultural superhighways, knitting together diverse provinces with a shared Roman identity. By the 1st century CE, roads like the Via Egnatia and Via Traiana carried Latin, Roman law, and urban planning from Britain to Syria. You're picturing a traveler pausing at a roadside tavern, swapping stories in broken Latin with a merchant from Gaul. These roads made it possible for Roman culture to seep into every corner of the empire, from bathhouses in Britannia to amphitheaters in North Africa. They spread the Pax Romana, a fragile peace that let ideas like philosophy, art, and bureaucracy flow as freely as olive oil. The concrete you're walking on didn't just move goods, it moved Rome itself. Now, for the quirky tidbit, early Christians used these roads to spread their faith, sometimes hiding messages in plain sight. You spot a faint fish symbol scratched into a milestone, a secret nod to fellow believers. These roads, built for Rome's glory, became conduits for a religion that would outlast the empire. Historians still argue whether this was ironic or inevitable. Did Rome's roads accidentally pave the way for Christianity's rise, Or were they just neutral infrastructure, used by anyone with a message? Either way, you're smirking at the thought of a Roman engineer, proud of his concrete, unknowingly helping a new faith go viral. You weave through the shadows, imagining the travelers who carried culture along this path. A philosopher from Athens might have lugged scrolls of Stoic wisdom, while a priestess spread the cult of Isis from Egypt. These roads, thanks to that pozzolana concrete you're still low-key obsessed with, were reliable enough to make long journeys feasible. They let Roman governors impose laws, but also let locals share their own traditions, creating a cultural mashup. You're picturing a British chieftain grudgingly adopting a toga, only to sneak druidic chants at night. The roads didn't just Romanize the world. They let the world talk back in accents Rome never expected. Let's toss in a modern aside. Ever scrolled social media and seen a meme go global in hours? That's what these roads did for Roman culture, minus the cat videos. They were the internet of their day, spreading trends faster than you can say, "New emperor, who dis?" Historians still argue whether this cultural spread was a net positive or a steamroller for local traditions. Some say it unified the empire. Others argue it erased indigenous identities under a Latin veneer. You're leaning toward both because Rome had a knack for blending conquest with compromise. Either way, these roads made the empire a cultural mosaic held together by concrete. You pause by that fish-etched milestone, its edges worn but defiant. Remember that handprint from the last stretch, left by a forgotten worker. It's a reminder that these roads carried human stories, not just imperial agendas. They spread Rome's culture, but also its challengers, new faiths, new ideas, new fights. As you keep walking, you're starting to sense a shift. The empire's peak is fading, and these roads won't stay busy forever. You're about to trace why Rome's concrete highways began to crumble, and it's not just about wear and tear. You're still wandering this Roman road. The concrete under your sandals, now cloaked in shadows, its surface cool and silent under a starlit sky. The air carries a faint chill, tinged with the scent of damp earth and fading campfires, and the quiet feels heavy, like the empire itself is holding its breath. You've seen these roads carry armies, merchants, and even new gods, but now you're sensing a change. The Via Appia isn't as crowded anymore. The milestones look weathered, neglected. You're about to trace why Rome's concrete highways began to fade, their once proud paths slipping into the twilight of history. Let's walk through the decline of the Vii and why even ingenious concrete couldn't save them. The mainstream fact is that the decline of Roman roads mirrored the empire's fall, as political chaos and economic collapse starved infrastructure of care. By the 4th century CE, when the Western Roman Empire was crumbling, roads like the Via Flaminia were no longer maintained. You're picturing overgrown verges and cracked slabs as local governors hoarded funds instead of repairing bridges. The empire split, invasions rolled in, and the roads, built to bind Rome's world, became battlegrounds or bandit hideouts. The concrete, that Pozzolana wonder you've been geeking out over, was durable, but it couldn't survive neglect. Without regular upkeep, rainwater pooled, roots invaded, and even Roman engineering bowed to time. Now, for the quirky tidbit, some roads were looted for their stones, like ancient recycling gone wild. You're passing a gap where paving slabs are missing, likely carted off to build a medieval church or a warlord's castle. Locals saw these roads as free quarries, stripping them bare. Historians still argue whether this was pragmatic or a cultural loss. Did people value survival over preserving Rome's legacy? Or were they just clueless about the road's engineering marvels? Either way, you're wincing at the thought of a farmer prying up concrete to patch his barn, oblivious to the empire it once held together. You step carefully over a cracked slab, imagining the slow decay. The roads didn't vanish overnight. They faded as Rome's priorities shifted. Barbarian invasions, Goths, Vandals, take your pick, disrupted trade, so merchants stopped traveling. Legions stretched thin, couldn't patrol or repair the VAE. You're seeing ghosts of the travelers from earlier. The Syrian trader, the Christian with his fish symbol. They're gone now, replaced by looters and silence. The concrete's still tough. Some sections will outlast the Middle Ages, but without Rome's obsessive maintenance, it's fighting a losing battle. That crocodile dung embankment you chuckled at, it's crumbling too. No match for centuries of neglect. Let's toss in a modern aside. Ever driven past an abandoned mall, all cracked pavement and weeds? That's what these roads became, monuments to a world that moved on. Modern cities let infrastructure rot when budgets dry up, just like Rome did. Historians still argue whether the road's decline was inevitable or a failure of leadership. Some say the empire's bloated bureaucracy choked itself. Others point to external pressures like invasions and plagues. You're leaning toward a mix of both, because nothing kills a highway faster than a society too busy fighting to fix it. Still, you're marveling at how long these roads clung on. Their concrete laughing at time, even as the empire fell apart. You pause, kicking a loose pebble that's probably seen more history than your hometown. The Via Appia feels like a ghost now, but its legacy isn't dead. That handprint from the worker, that fish symbol, they're echoes of a world these roads shaped. You're about to see how Rome's concrete paths left their mark on today's world. From highways to city grids, the stars are bright and the road's still here, whispering its final secrets. Keep walking, the end's in sight. You're nearing the end of this Roman road, the concrete under your sandals, now a faint silver under a sky heavy with stars. The air is soft, scented with dew, and the memory of sun-warmed stone. And each step feels like a quiet farewell to an empire's dream. You've walked through Rome's triumphs and its shadows, felt the weight of its concrete genius and the hands that built it. Now, as the Via Appia stretches into the darkness, you're ready to see how these ancient paths paved the way for the world you know today. Let's connect Rome's roads to modern highways, city grids, and the stubborn spirit of infrastructure that still shapes your life. The mainstream fact is that Roman roads laid the foundation for modern infrastructure, influencing everything from European highways to urban planning. By the time Rome fell in 476 CE, its 250,000 miles of roads had set a standard for connectivity that medieval and modern engineers chased. You're picturing the A1 motorway in Italy, tracing the Via Flaminia's path, or London streets following Roman routes. The concrete techniques, yes, that pozzolana magic you're still raving about, inspired later builders and the idea of straight, durable roads, shaped Europe's transport networks. Even today, engineers study Roman methods, hoping to crack the code for infrastructure that doesn't crumble every election cycle. Now, for the quirky tidbit, some modern vineyards use Roman roads as property lines. You're imagining a Tuscan winemaker sipping Chianti, pointing to a weathered Via Appia stretch and saying, "That's my boundary." These roads, built for legions, now divide grapevines. Historians still argue whether this reuse shows respect for Rome's legacy or just lazy surveying. Are these roads still Roman when they're fencing in Cabernet? Or are they just convenient relics? Either way, you're chuckling at the idea of a 2,000-year-old highway settling a neighborly wine feud. You pause, leaning against a milestone, its carved letters barely legible. Rome's roads didn't just survive, they taught the world how to move. Their grid-like precision inspired city planners from Lisbon to New York. Ever notice how Manhattan streets feel oddly Roman? The concrete's durability, layered with that crocodile dung embankment you're still not over, set a bar for engineering that we're still trying to match. Modern highways owe a nod to Rome's obsession with straight lines and solid foundations, even if we swap pozzolana for asphalt and prayers for traffic cams. You're starting to see these roads everywhere, in the GPS lines on your phone, in the hum of tires on a freeway. Let's toss in a modern aside. Ever cursed a traffic jam, wishing for a teleport? Rome's roads were the ancient answer, shrinking empires the way highways shrink your commute when they're not gridlocked. Historians still argue whether Roman roads' legacy is more about engineering or ideology. Did they inspire our drive for connectivity, or just our habit of paving over history for progress? You're leaning toward both because every time you hit a smooth stretch of interstate, you're riding Rome's coattails. Whether you know it or not, you take a final step, the road fading into shadow. That handprint from the worker, that fish symbol, that cheeky graffiti, they're all part of this concrete's story, binding past to present. As you linger, the world grows quieter, the stars softer, the air gentler against your skin. These roads, built to conquer, now cradle history, their stones whispering of empires and travelers long gone. Let the night wrap around you. Let the hum of ancient concrete fade into a soothing lullaby. You're safe here, carried by paths that held a world together. Close your eyes, drift into the stillness, and let Rome's legacy rock you to sleep.